and she is the director for a non-profit called the Conservation Resource Alliance, who is also part of the implementation team for the dam removal project here in Traverse City on the Boardman River. So Amy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the Conservation Resource Alliance is?
Sure. And we'll boil our first 50 years as an organization coming up next year as our anniversary down to, a short version of what this organization does. We serve a 15-county region, roughly a quarter of the lower peninsula of Michigan, and our niche in conservation work is in habitat enhancement and protection, waterways, river work, wildlife corridors. That's the sort of work that we've done for our first 50 years as an organization.
So it's 50 years of an organization. How long have you been involved with the organization?
I celebrated my 25th anniversary with CRA last month. So,
wow.
Yeah, I've been there for a full half. So there were people that came before me that set our path. One of the niches that our organization has that we're very recognized for and that connected us to this project is in building and facilitating partnerships. We've been doing that kind of work since well before that word became in vogue. There's so much collaborative work going on nowadays, but back in the early 80s, we set off on our first watershed restoration project as a very holistic effort from stem to stern on a fairly large watershed in western Michigan. And that really was the beginning of the partnership model that we use today, where we ask the questions, who all could help with this effort, who has a stake in it, who has something to gain, something to lose, and we build partnerships around that to carry out really large projects that are way bigger and more ambitious than any group could take on alone.
Absolutely, and I mean, this particular project that I've been introduced to through the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians is the largest dam removal project in Michigan's history.
Yes, correct. Yep, and it also tracks in that vein because it's the largest partnership effort that CRA has taken on as well. Sometimes I say we, spent our first 49 years getting ready to take on a project like this. And it was right in our strike zone. So in 2005, when there was a decision to remove the dams and go forward with this effort, CRA took a giant, scary step forward and said, we'll raise our hand and offer to be the project manager for this gang on the implementation team to try to hold you all together, to keep you pointed in one direction, to take on some processes and practices that we think will add efficiency and quality to the project, such as, for example, we did some joint qualifications-based selection processes to bring the professional engineers to the project instead of a more traditional process where an owner of a facility or a piece of infrastructure like a dam would simply let a contract, for engineering. We said, well, wait a minute, we have an opportunity perhaps to seek out a partner in an engineering firm that could not only take on a dam removal, but maybe could also design a bridge and could potentially even be the design firm that would help us with some of the fish passage parts of the project at the downstream end. And if we could get the road commission and the two owners of the dams together with some of the agencies that will fund and regulate the project, and we could do a very robust selection process, do the hard work on the front end, we could gain all kinds of efficiency working with that carefully selected engineering firm for the rest of the life of the project. And so we actually did that, and that is very unique work. It's not an approach that we typically take in civil engineering projects, for example.
No, absolutely. So for people that are kind of tuning into this and are curious about how this project split up, can you briefly explain kind of the stages of this project and what the end goal is?
Sure. It's, as you said, Kevin, it's the largest dam removal project in the state of Michigan's history. We're gaining a lot of notoriety and attention for that, of course. But when we first took it on, we understood it was best taken on as an entire project, or understood to be a stem to stern Boardman River reborn effort. And what it involved was the complete removal of 3 of the 4 dams on the Boardman River and modification of the 4th dam, the lowest dam, that will be changed to allow fish to pass in both directions while still providing some protection against invasives or sea lamprey. And so as we proceeded through the project, one phase necessarily was overlapping the next in time. For example, when we took the first dam out in 2012 at Brownbridge, that was the most upstream location, we were already underway raising funds and doing some of the design work for the next several dams. And back to the partnership concept, you know, there are all kinds of efficiencies occurring along the way here because, for example, when it was time to check for asbestos and lead in the old powerhouses at the 3 dams, we did that under one work order with one firm that came out one time and did all that work for all 3 dams. But in general, we understand the project to be kind of phased. Dam number 1, the most upstream dam in 2012, the one that's going on right now was the biggest and second dam removal at Boardman, so 2017. 2018 is planned for the 3rd and final dam removal, and at the same time, the 4th dam at Union Street being modified under that Fish Pass initiative is launching right now and will be ready to be starting its implementation in that 2018 timeframe.
Yeah, and that fish passage that you mentioned, that's a world first as well. I mean,
It is.
This isn't just for Michigan. This is a model that can be used for the world. And you're talking about more of what I would describe as a holistic approach for the whole of the project to bring in those efficiencies, which is fantastic. Because you're very involved with the funding side of things. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, how this funding came together? Because we're not talking about a few $100,000 here. We're talking about some considerable millions of dollars to be able to facilitate this project.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I'll credit, you know, the partnership model and the whole philosophy of working together, building trust among the partners, all collaborating around a certain set of goals and objectives, and in this case, fundraising goals. You know, maybe one thing that we should say up front that seems kind of obvious but is super important, we all agreed on the front end of the project, not without some effort of course, but we all agreed on what the outcomes needed to be of the project. What were the driving ecological goals that were propelling us into this project? And that's important for fundraising so that we don't end up raising funds for the wrong things, right? It also helped us understand that is one of CRA's talents. We're not the only fundraising organization on this team, but we're one that has a long history, a very, very solid track record with public and private agencies all over the realm of fisheries and ecology. We've built some trust over the years, and once we feel we have a solid goal in mind, in this case freeing the Boardman River, the river reborn, we can describe the ecological benefits in terms that funding programs are built around. For example, miles of newly accessible habitat for brook trout. You know, that would be a gold ring or a hot button with certain funding programs that are set up to do that. Then we have a fairly simple pathway to going into proposal writing. There's a lot of efficiencies that we gained because we were all telling the story together and consistently. We would ask the question along the way, well, which partner would be best suited to pursue this particular funding source or take on this bit of work? So we talk openly and honestly about the strengths and weaknesses of each organization. And we ask, instead of asking maybe what's a more traditional way to tackle a problem, ooh, who could we get to do this job? Instead, we all ask ourselves, what can we do? What can we bring to the table that is already one of our strengths and contribute toward this operation? So some of it is kind of, a matter of motivating our partners to step up and do what they can, strengthen themselves at the same time, but be very mindful of what we all are really strong at doing.
Now that sounds great. So with some of those ecological goals, could you explain in a little bit more detail what those ecological goals were from removing the dams and restoring the river back to its original state before it was called the Boardman River.
Sure, there's ecological goals and there's community and economic goals as well, right? So what we think of first and foremost, and most of us are at the table because we understand what the ecological benefits of dam removal are. We are taking temperature regimes back to where they belonged when Mother Nature guided the way that the river flowed through the whole system. We understand the value of floodplains that are connected to channels and river channels that have native types of substrate underneath them that support the kinds of diversity, not only fish, but aquatic insects and even amphibians and reptiles that depend on the kind of stream channel and floodplain and wetland complexes that Mother Nature designed. So our designs and our restoration are informed by the original condition of the waterway, and nobody designs ecological functions better than Mother Nature, right?
Right.
So we have all kinds of exciting monitoring going on that helps us kind of gauge whether the restoration is going the way we want to. We're back to the partnership again. Is our state Department of Natural Resources Fisheries Division is a stellar partner. They're one of the best fisheries agencies that the country has. We're very, very lucky with how high caliber that agency is. They have a regular part of their day-to-day business that involves doing fish population surveys. So we're able to not only demonstrate that fish can now access parts of the stream that were blocked prior to the dam removal, but you heard today in one of our team meetings that we're watching the composition of the fisheries change, more brook trout, a higher proportion of brook trout to brown trout, more cold water species, less warm water species. So that's an example of an element of an ecological outcome. But we also have exciting data coming in that shows how the aquatic insect community, kind of the bottom of the food chain, is changing in response to the dam removal. We can count the numbers of miles. We're looking at control of invasive plants as we change the landscape and reseed or revegetate parts of the floodplain. There's a very close eye on making sure that it's native vegetation that pops back up and that we don't introduce invasive plants in this process. The equipment has to be decontaminated by the contractors every time they leave or enter the sites for these projects. So there's all kinds of great ecological benefits in returning this river back to what Mother Nature designed it to be. It's a globally rare resource. It's a cold water stream that's fed by groundwater, and there just are not that very many of those types of systems in the world.
Yeah, in fact, when I paddled it, one of your colleagues, Mr. Winkler, actually took me and we stopped the canoe and we went up on the side and we saw one of the actual spring heads. That means that this river stays 40 degrees throughout the year. It doesn't freeze.
Right.
So it is very, very unique.
Right.
And it's huge that this is being done. So you spoke a little bit about the funding. Can you be a little bit more specific in some of the partnerships and some of the people that have been key in this process to ensure that money comes in to be able to do what needs to be done? Yeah,
absolutely. It's a very eclectic blend of federal, state, private, individual dollars that have come in, but by the numbers, the federal portion, especially the federal portion that tied to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, is very predominant in the funding equation. So final numbers are not in for the second dam yet, but I feel fairly certain that just like with the first dam removal phase, over 80% of the funding in each of these phases is represented by Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding. What most people don't realize about that, though, is that that is not just one pot of funds. It is when it comes out of the federal budget, but it's deployed in a number of different ways. So we see Great Lakes Restoration funds coming to the Boardman Dam Removal Project through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They have been key partners as a federal agency. They run 3 or 4 different funding programs, kind of oriented around fisheries and water quality and ecosystems, that have pumped millions of dollars into this project. There are collaborative agencies that form around Great Lakes issues as well that are using some Great Lakes Restoration dollars. One of them is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They have a program called Sustain Our Great Lakes. That program, I think, has made the largest single contribution or grant to the project at $1.5 million. But that was not the only Sustain Our Great Lakes grant. Some of these funders have come back over and over into each phase of the project. There is an organization called the Great Lakes Fishery Trust that is using settlement money that traces back to a pumped storage project in Michigan's history, and they have a trust fund set up to aid in the repair and restoration of fisheries that are connected to the Great Lakes. That funding program, the Great Lakes Fishery Trust, just recently made its 4th major award to the program here on the Boardman River as well. So they made a lead gift of $1 million to help start this, and they're back here with almost $500,000 to help us finish the dam removal project as well. And the list goes on. Our Michigan DNR has 2 or 3 different funding programs that we have been able to tap into. We have foundation leadership with some of the foundations in Michigan, family foundations, private foundations, local funding leaders, the municipalities here, and then the other really significant funding partner in this equation has been the tribe here in Grand Traverse Band. They have access to certain funds, federal and otherwise, that have been brought to the project right from the beginning and are still flowing in to help the project to date. And the other aspect of that is just kind of the philosophy that comes with that partnership and the funding that the Grand Traverse Band has been able to pass through. You know, that tribe has shown some immense courage, both politically and financially, getting behind some of the riskier parts of the project to step out, for example, and work with the Army Corps of Engineers, who also, as an agency, played a major role in funding the project. So another really large chunk of funds came to the second dam removal. Traces to Great Lakes Restoration Initiative again, but it was EPA dollars that came through the Army Corps as an agency to be spent here to remove the second dam that you're seeing unfold right now. And in doing that, the Army Corps requires a local, non-federal partner to work with. And looking around, we looked at the partnership in the same way that we described a minute ago. Where's the capacity to serve as that non-federal partner? Which organization has the administrative horsepower, has the political courage to sign agreements with the Army Corps of Engineers and to be the local sponsor for the project? And a couple of years ago, the Grand Traverse Band stepped into that role, which was a really large favor for this community. We're still pretty rural. Most of our organizations and municipalities really didn't have the kind of strength or horsepower that role required. So that's a kind of a circular tour around the funding. I showed today, and our implementation team met earlier this afternoon, and every month we look at a 13-page line by line by line table that CRA maintains for our partners, and it tallies up every piece of funding that's been brought to the table for the project or peripherally related to the project. And the total dollar amounts on that table right now are over $25 million. So if you want to think about it as a whole, that's about the scale of the work that we're doing.
That's absolutely incredible. And as you mentioned, the partnership with the Army Corps and the Grand Traverse Band, to my understanding, that's the first time that a federally recognized tribe and the Army Corps of Engineers have partnered together on a project like this. So
certainly in this region of Army Corps, that is true. You know, so that I don't know that there's been any other examples, but if they are, they're farther away out west and for totally different purposes than what we have here. Certainly this scale of the project and the roles that are very, very unusual for the Grand Traverse Band to play and the Army Corps to play in the project have been just fascinating to watch unfold.
Yeah, absolutely, and I certainly appreciate you joining us. And you've talked a lot about protecting the Great Lakes. So right now there are some big issues going on in Michigan, specifically around the Straits of Mackinac and the Enbridge Pipeline 5, that there's a big move to shut that down. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that as well.
Well, I'm not an expert in that area, Kevin, and I'm following that with interest as a Michigan citizen, you know, of course. I'm trying hard to understand what the issues are, what the alternatives are. But as an organization, CRA we kind of try to hone in on those things that we're good at. So we have other partners in the community that are playing an advocacy and education role, and I really appreciate their taking the time, to push out information that's factual and important to the rest of us.
No, absolutely, I appreciate that, and it's interesting that you don't have a massive amount of information on that, and that's no slight in the sense against you, because there was a survey done recently, and I'm not sure the sample size, but I believe it was 70% of Michiganders aren't aware of it.
Sure.
So that shows something about sometimes how these huge potential threats to our ecological systems
kind of
really
sneak up on us. Right. I remember the first day that I saw the map, that illustrates all the pipelines under the state and the lakes. And of course, in our work, we were very tuned into the spill from the Enbridge pipeline down in the Kalamazoo River. And certainly, the big concern, of course, is that none of the work that we're doing here in these rivers, including in the Boardman River, I've started to understand those in recent years and decades as not just benefiting the rivers and the ecosystem in Grand Traverse Bay, for example, but this work collectively that we do as an organization and do with our partners around rivers is the key to maintaining resilience at the Great Lakes scale. When I finally understood the threats that face the Great Lakes in terms of ecological collapse and other attacks from invasive species or spills and things that are in our future, unfortunately, I started asking the question, well, what is it that we can do, and what are some of the most important things that need to be done to protect the Great Lakes? And when I heard that, really the science points to the importance of keeping those tributaries functioning and healthy, like keeping a circulatory system healthy in a body, right? We've heard that analogy. We can't possibly expect to stop all future threats to the Great Lakes, but what we can do is keep the system as healthy as it can possibly be so that its native resilience will help it to recover and respond and adapt. So that's the work that we're doing, and that really is the basic ecological driving force behind what we're doing. And so it doesn't say that we turn our backs on threats like the Enbridge Line 5 issue up in the Straits, but in some ways, as an organization, CRA is very laser focused on those things that we are expert at and that we can do. And the Boardman River Dam Removal Project is a very gigantic example of just that work.
No, absolutely, and I can completely respect that. So just before we wrap this up, do you have any message to maybe any of the younger generation that are watching out there? Because they're the ones who are going to inherit whatever we leave behind.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I guess, the lessons that we've learned are pay attention to the overarching goals of the project and make sure that your understanding of the benefits, like you asked me about ecological benefits, is broad and all-encompassing, because when those benefits start laying over each other and we realize what there is to gain if we push through all the barriers and climb over all the hurdles to get this done, we're not only providing resilience to the Great Lakes and improving the fisheries and the temperatures, but we're also taking away future risks to the community from catastrophic failure. We're improving the protection, natural protection against flooding. We're saving the community dollars that could better be invested in other proactive, positive things. So I guess I would suggest to the next generation that we keep our eye on the prize, understand the total value of what we're doing, and really hang on to that when you need that extra motivation to get through that next, grant proposal or permit application, because it's very hard work. Band together with your partners, split the workload up in a reasonable way so that no one entity, gets saddled with doing all the work. Share the workload, but share the workload in a smart way. Don't feel like you have to split the workload up evenly or give everyone a chance at everything. That's a recipe for disaster. Instead, I would encourage you to be honest about where the strong partners are in your community. Recognize them even if they're lodged in non-traditional organizations, perhaps a tribe or a city planning office somewhere, the mayor. You never know where the talent might be, but recognize it, deploy your partners to do what they do best, don't try to work too far out of your expertise area, or, you know, the whole project can collapse on you if you lose sight of that formula of who is good at what. So those would be some of my pieces of advice, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, I certainly appreciate you spending some time here with us today and explaining those vital things and your involvement in this incredible project.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin.